Before we start this video, a large thank you to Yo World, Andreas, WPR24, How, Marcel, a name I unfortunately cannot pronounce. Thank you very much for the support, my friend. Adam, Milo, Oser, Pyro, Simio, and Mizuki for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And a tremendous thank you to Halo Burner and Mr. Fox Gaming for their continued support of the channel this month on Patreon. It is greatly appreciated, guys, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hello everybody, and today we're going to add a Site of Grace. And I know I said we were going to do armor or something of the lot, but I saw a comment in the description, and he said it really make the game feel more complete if we had a way to respawn the enemies, and I could not agree more. So I'm just going to use this Brazier model here, Brazier, however you say that. I got it on a website called Sketchfab, I believe. I will link it in the description if you want it. It's free to use. This is just a placeholder object, so we're not using something so boring like a cube or a sphere. Just kind of really easy to see what this is. So I'm just going to hop back here in 1 second. Just going to put some colors on this and add some particles. So I'll just jump right back when that's done. Not going to spend too much time on this because, again, it's just a representation of a checkpoint. Here we are. If you want to see the particles quickly, you can pause and look at the effects or the values I have here, rather. Again, not spending too much time on this because this is meant to be a placeholder model, and I'm sure you'll have your own designs for a checkpoint in whatever kind of game you're making. So I also would recommend not calling it a Site of Grace if this is your actual game. If you're following this series just purely for the educational side of things, that's great. But definitely don't be afraid here to really think of something different and odd, or just, you know, give it a generic name if it's just a placeholder for now. You haven't really thought of what you want to call it yet. But I'm going to call it a Site of Grace because this is a tutorial series based around ELDEN mechanics, and that's just a name everyone was very familiar with. And it's very easy to see what this is going to do. So I'm going to add a script to this now. And I'm going to call it Site of Grace Interactable. And let's set up our script here by deleting the start and update functionality and dropping in our namespace as is per tradition. And then we're going to save that and make this derive from an interactable. So when it derives from an interactable, we're going to get all of our interactable variables. So we have the interactable text and the collider here. I am going to set up a collider on this. Try putting on a mesh collider. I don't think it worked though, because I think the children are where the geo's at. Yeah, so having a mesh collider doesn't work, but I'm just going to put a collider on this object so we can't walk through it. You can use individual mesh colliders if you're using the same model on the children, which will give them their own little collisions, but I'm just going to put a capsule collider on it. Also going to add a rigid body to it, and we're going to make it not use gravity. We're going to make it is kinematic, so we can interact with our interactable collider that will be a child object. So let's add an empty game object to this, and let's call this interactable collider, and I'm going to make it a sphere collider. And I'm going to make it so we can access this checkpoint from all sides. Also, if you wanted to, you can see these little values like box 004, box 005. If you add a mesh collider to those and hit convex, yes, that does work. So if you want collision to be on the mesh, you can just add it to those individual objects if you are using this like me. But again, this is just a placeholder, so I'm just adding a capsule collider. Not very important at all. I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about it. So I am going to go over here now and edit the radius of this collider. Okay, so to set it to something so it's just all around the object, but also not too close, set the layered interactable, change it to a trigger, very important. I'm then going to drag in my interactable collider here, and we are good to go. So this is a host-only interactable. We're actually going to disable these when characters join the game in the future, so you won't be able to use it until they leave. So if I go into the game, you can see it does say rest when I get close, so that's working as intended so far. All right, let's hop back into the scripts. We're going to copy this active variable over here from the fog wall and paste it here on the Site of Grace interactable. Going to say using unity.net code, and then what we're going to do is just change it from is active to is activated. Okay, what else do we need? Well, there's actually going to be two different kinds of interactable text for this object. One if you already have it activated, and one if you do not have it activated. So let's make a header for interaction text. And I'm just going to make two serializable string variables here. I'm going to call the first one unactivated interaction text. And then the second one will be activated interaction text. So the first one is going to say something like restore Site of Grace or activate Site of Grace. And again, this will be prompted if you have not already activated the Site of Grace. The second one is going to say rest. And again, depending on what kind of checkpoints you're using for your project, these can say completely different things. So definitely tailor it to what you have in your game. Next, I'm going to make a private void called activate. And actually, let's make it more clear. Let's just call this restore Site of Grace. So it's very clear that this is going to come before the activation. And the naming conventions match up nicely. So let's make some pseudocode in here to discuss what we're going to do. the first thing we're going to do is add this site of grace to an activated site of grace list that we have in our save files, or rather a dictionary. Next, we're going to play an animation when we actually activate the site of grace on our player, and then we're going to send a pop-up notifying us that the site of grace has been restored, and then we're going to enable/activate this site of grace. So then you might want to play some visual effects or some particle effects or sound effects or everything all at once, whatever you want to do. Okay, so next let's make another function here and also type out some pseudocode. I'm going to call this function rest at site of grace, and this is going to be used if you've already activated the site of grace, and this is going to refill your flasks, which we don't have right now, so that's going to be a to-do. It's going to reset monsters on the map and characters, so we can do that in this video. It's going to update or further or force change any quest characters or objects. So again, that will be a future to-do, because we don't have anything right now in terms of a quest system or a setting stage system. So right now, let's just put this reset monsters and character locations one just down here. We'll do that one in this video. Okay, so we have our plan of action. Now let's actually start writing some logic here. So I'm going to begin by overriding the interact. Let's go back and check it. Everything that looks cool, so we can utilize all that function on the base interact. That's all good to go. Gonna have to change subtly how the interactable collider enables and disables, but more on that in a bit. So we're gonna first check if we have the site activated, and if we don't, then we're going to do the restore site of grace function, and if we do, we're gonna do the rest at site of grace function. Okay, cool. Now we can save that. Now let's go to the base interact. You can see here we're disabling the collider, and this is okay, but we also need to re-enable it after we've rested. So we want to disable it until, or after we've activated it rather, we want to disable it until we get the pop-up and then re-enable it after the pop-up is done, so we can then have the option to rest there. So let's actually make a header for site of grace, because the first thing we're going to do is actually add this to our save list, and this is just going to contain an int for site of grace ID. You can use a string if you prefer. I just like using ints for IDs because they're really simple, and you're probably only going to have a few dozen of these checkpoints, maybe more though, depends on the size of your game. And I can kind of put the is activated in that that site of grace info header, so we're going to do that. Next, let's go to the character save data, and I'm going to make a new serializable dictionary, so I can copy this boss serializable dictionary. I'll make a header for the sites of grace, and we can just do the exact same thing we've done here, so we just use an int, because that is the ID that I'm using. If you're using a string, you can do that. And a bool for the status of it being activated. So I'm going to call this sites of grace, and I'm going to make a comment here like below. The int is the site of grace ID, and the bool is the activation status. Very straightforward. Also down here on your public character save data, you want to say that is equal to a new serializable dictionary, int, and bool. So this is going to work exactly the same way as the bosses. So if you've set that up with the bosses already, I encourage you to pause the video right now and go ahead and make this site of grace save to your save file right now. Go for it. Okay, so back over here, let's make an override start. What we want to do now is check when this object starts. Does this exist in the save data? We do that by saying if world save game manager.instance.current character data.sites of grace.contains key, and we pass our site of grace ID. So if it does contain the site of grace, it means it has a status associated with it. So we're going to say is activated.value is equal to, and then again we reference the exact same one by saying world save game manager.instance.current character data.sites of grace, and we pass the site of grace ID. Otherwise, it does not exist in the save data, so it means this must be false. Is activated.value is equal to false. Cool. Now we can do if is activated here. And then if it is activated, we want to play some effects here, or maybe enable some effects. So maybe the grace is already lit up when you get to it. If it's already activated, maybe there's some particles floating around it. Whatever you'd like to do, this is a good place to do it. We're going to check for the if is activated here. Now, since we do have this as a network variable, what we can do is use an onIsActivated change, which we're going to do. But first, let's actually add some simple effects here. So let's make a game object for particles. And I'm just going to drag them in there. We're going to enable those particles if it is active. Just a little way to tell that it's already active. Nothing too flashy. But I encourage you to be totally flashy if you're at a point with your project where you can do that. That's great. Definitely go to town with it. So activated particles.setActive true. That's what we're going to do. Now if I scroll down here, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab the logic here. And let's come right to the bottom. And let's make a private void for onIsActiveChanged, or onIsActivated changed. So you're not going to be able to use the Sites of Grace if you join as a co-op player, but you can still see if the host has them activated if you want to show the effects off. So we're going to use this functionality here. Bool old status and bool new status just like before. And if isActivated.value, we want to, again, copy our code up here. Activated particles, set active true. Paste that in there. Okay, cool. So we can delete this from here now. And now we want to call isActive.onValueChanged on network spawn and despawn. So we're going to do that. So let's just come down right below start here and override on network spawn and then on network despawn. And then we're going to say isActive.onValueChanged plus equals to onIsActiveChanged. And don't forget to unsubscribe from that on despawn. So do the same thing, but just use minus equals. And now if you join the game, you will see that the effects will be present even if you are not the host. You still can't use Sites of Grace unless you want that to be your functionality, of course, but defaultly you cannot. Now on start, I'm also going to say if is owner, this applies. You could say if is server, alternatively, or if is host. All three would work in this situation, but I'm just going to keep it as is owner. They will function identically though. So we only want to run this start logic if we are the owner, which means we are the host in this case. Okay. This looks good. Let's save it. And then right here on network spawn, we're going to say if we're not the owner, let's just force run this onActivated because again, this only runs when it changes. So let's say you activate a Site of Grace and then someone joins you. Well, you want to run this again to sync up the status with them. So if we join when the site is already activated or the status has already been set, this just basically activates it to the status's current status. You won't ever need this if you're the host because you're always present when it activates, but if you are a client who's joining midway through the game, it's different. Okay, cool. That looks good. Make a comment here to be as clear as possible. Okay, so what's next? I am going to save that and then come down here to restore Site of Grace. So add Site of Grace to save files. Let's do that right now. We're going to say isActivated.value is equal to true. And then we are going to simply say if world saveGameManager.instance.current character save data. And we're going to see if this contains this Site of Grace again. And if it does contain this Site of Grace key, we're going to remove it and then re-add it with a new status. So if this does exist, let's remove it and then let's re-add it with the status of true. We remove it by saying world saveGameManager.instance.current character data.sites of grace. Then we're going to say .remove and we're going to pass the Site of Grace ID. And we add it by doing much the same. We're just going to change the keyword remove with add, and it's going to make us require a status. So we're going to pass true. Cool. Very simple. Now I'm going to make a comment here just to really describe what I just said again. If our save file contains info on this Site of Grace, we're going to first remove it and then re-add it with the status of true. True as in, yes, this is activated. Now, playing the animation is an easy one. We're just going to make this require a player manager variable, which we always get when we interact anyway, because that requires it to interact. And then we're going to make that player play an animation. Again, you're only going to interact with this if you are the owner, so no need to check for any of that stuff here. Then we're going to say player.playerAnimatorManager.play target action animation. And what do we want to play? Well, we don't have an animation set up just yet, but I am going to pull one from Mixamo. And I'll leave it in the description if you guys want to use it too. So I'm going to call it activate_site_of_grace_01. We're going to say true because we are performing the action. We're going to lock us in that action. So that is the plays and animation portion of this checked out. Now what else do we want to do here? Well, optionally too, you can hide your weapon models if you want to play some animations like that. If you would like me to show you how to do that, just let me know. It is a polish element, but it's very fast to do. I do when I play gestures too in my project. And a lot of animations that you just wouldn't have your weapons out for. So next is sends a pop-up. This one is very simple, and I encourage you right now to pause the video and do this yourself. Oh, I have an error. It's because I'm not passing the player under interact in both these functions. So yes, I encourage you to go and do this right now. Pause the video. You know how to do this by now. Go to your pop-up manager, make a pop-up for the Site of Grace or the checkpoint. So I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to duplicate the boss defeated pop-up. I'm going to call this Site of Grace pop-up. I'm going to change all the colors and stuff, whatever I want, to the Site of Grace. Now, if you have all your pop-ups being the same, because I'm just making these as if they were all a little different, even though they're all basically the same, you can just make one pop-up object and change the text and the text colors every time you call a pop-up instead of having 3 separate pop-ups for you died, boss defeated, and Site of Grace. But I'm making these assuming that you're going to make these a little bit different yourself, so that's why I'm giving them their own separate little canvas renderers and their own separate objects. But you don't need to do that. If they're just text and just a color, you can just literally make one and reference this one for all pop-ups and change the text and the color. So you can see here, I have 2. I have you died and boss defeated. I'm going to make one here for the Site of Grace. But I'll make a comment here. If you plan on making all these pop-ups identical, just make one and change that one. So you can simplify your code there. And there's less variables going on, yada, yada, yada. But as I say, I'm going to make these with the assumption that we're going to change these, and they're all going to be a little bit different. So Site of Grace pop-up. I'm just going to change everything that says boss to Site of Grace. I'm going to copy it identically. I'm going to skip through some of this right now because you don't need to see me changing 8 variables. So again, boss defeated changes to Grace restored. There we go. We can copy this send boss defeated pop-up, do the same thing. It will be send Grace restored pop-up, and then boss defeated message becomes Grace restored message. And then everything in here that says boss defeated, again, it becomes Grace restored, and then we're good to go. So then all we have to do is call this function here now from our interactable object. And then we can just do it the same as we do with every pop-up by referencing the player manager UI. Oh, and also don't forget to drag in your variables. I almost forgot. So go over here to your Grace restored pop-up variables, drag them all in, and save your player UI. Now, over here on the restore Site of Grace, we can just say player UI manager.instance.popup manager.send restore or Grace restore pop-up. And then the text, it's going to be, actually we're going to use all caps, Site of Grace restored. All right, cool. We should probably test that now before we continue to make sure that's all working as intended so far. So I am going to save that. Hop into the game here, drag in our activated particle effects, save the scene. Go back to our animation here. Let's go over now, and if you get this from Maximo like me, just go to your rig settings and then just make sure it's set to humanoid. And honestly, you can create the rig from this model. Sometimes XML animations are pretty finicky, so be very careful. I like to replace these whenever I can, but it's just for prototyping, so we're good to go. I'm going to make this root transform rotation original. I'm going to check the boxes here to descending position, and I'm going to leave the center of mass as the transform position for X and Z. And I'm probably going to speed up the animation a little bit, so I'm going to drag it in here like so. I'm going to give it the name I gave it on my script, and I'm going to make a transition back to the empty state here. So I'm going to call it activate underscore site underscore of underscore grace underscore 01. And I am going to change the speed because the animation is quite slow. So you can change the speed here in the animation state box. If you didn't know, right under the motion variable here, I'm going to set it to 2. All right. I am then going to jump back into the scripts on start. I'm going to change the interactable text depending on the activated status. Otherwise, we're not using our activated text variables. So again, if it is activated, we're going to use the activated interaction text. Otherwise, we're going to use the unactivated interaction text. So I was going to put that there like so and save it, and then we can jump into the game and test what we have so far. So interactable text is equal to activated interaction text, else interactable text is equal to unactivated interaction text. Save that. All right, I'm in the game here now. Restore Site of Grace. Cool. Working as intended. But you can see the collider doesn't come back on, so that's a problem. So let's actually add that in right now too. We want to be able to rest after we've restored it. We want to be prompted to do so. Right now you can see there's no collision. We've actually deactivated it. So over here, right under, honestly wherever, I'm going to put it right below rest at Site of Grace. I'm going to make a private IE enumerator, so a coroutine. Wait for animation and pop-up, then restore collider. So that's very clear in the name, not really questioning what that does. So we're just going to call it yield return new wait for seconds and make this value however long your animation is. The pop-up is not so important, but definitely wait until your animation is over. And then we're going to say this should give enough time for the animation to play, and if you want to, sure, the pop-up to fade out as well, or at least begin to fade out. And then we're just going to simply say interactable collider.enabled is equal to true. and that should allow us to activate or interact with it again. So under restore state of grace 2, we also want to start this coroutine after we've restored it. And then we want to save that again and come down to the start and copy this logic here on start and also paste it on is active changed. So when the is activated has been changed, we can say interactable text, if it's true, is equal to activated interaction text, else it's equal to unactivated interaction text. It should never change from active to inactive though. It should always only go from inactive to active, but still, just in case. Also accidentally called this function, we should be calling rest at site of grace here if it's already interacted, not restore. And let's make this require a player manager variable too, like so. Okay, it looks cool. And I'm just gonna throw a debug.log here for resting, just to show that we are actually doing that. Gonna save that again, go into the game, restore the site of grace. There we go, waits for a second, the collider comes back on, perfect, rest. Resting works, cool. Everything's working there as intended. So let's add some logic now to the resting. Now normally we'd open a menu here, but we're not gonna do that right now. All we wanna do is really just reset the monsters so we can keep continually testing stuff if you wanna respawn your monsters without exiting the game, because that's, you know, a bit of time you have to leave. So let's just make a public reset all characters void here on the world AI manager. And then what we're gonna do is despawn all characters, and then we're gonna go through each spawner, so AI character spawners, and we're just going to attempt to spawn each character again. So here we go. For each spawner in AI character spawners, we can say spawner dot attempt to spawn character. And maybe you have some kind of conditions under these where if there's certain stage settings in the world or there's certain quests to progress, you won't spawn the character anymore. That's why it's good to just use these spawners too. You can just do a lot of things before you spawn. Make a lot of checks, etc., etc. So resetting the monsters now, we'd say world AI manager.instance, and then we call reset all characters. Now we do have to do something, we have to clear our list after we delete them all. So let's do that too in a moment. Also, we can just, for the sake of temporary code here, we need to re-enable the collider here as well when we rest. So interactable collider.enabled equals true. So this is temporary again because we're going to re-enable this after we exit the menu, once the menu has been assigned and created. But temporarily, we'll just re-enable here too, so we can just keep resting as much as we want. Now, if you wanted to as well too, you could restore your health and stamina to full, because there's no flasks yet. But again, just for testing purposes, much easier to come back here and rest and do that. So under despawn all characters here, what I'm going to do after we've despawned them all is reference the spawning characters list and clear it. Now, go back in the scene, kill this character, go to the site of grace, restore it, and now let's rest. Let's look back and see if he responds. Yeah, cool, working as intended. So now we can actually reset all the monsters in the map. That's great for testing. And if you want to just get in and prototype some combat stuff and constantly just, you know, mess around with some weapons or gear or attack styles, very much so easier to do now. It makes the game loop feel more alive as well. It's going to reset him again. So let's actually just restore our health quickly too. Just as I just said, that is a great thing for testing. So temporary code here again, we're just going to set our health and stamina to its max value. I'm going to do that by just referencing the player variable here, .player network manager. We're going to say .current health .value is equal to player network manager max health .value. And you can do the same thing for your stamina. So copy and paste that, and we could do that too for our focus points, which, oh right, we don't have those yet. There's no magic in the game. Getting ahead of myself. There's only stamina, so we'll say current stamina.value is equal to max stamina.value. And that should be good. Let's go in the game and test it, make sure it works. I'm just gonna let that character hit me. Cool, I've taken some damage. Gonna go back now and restore this site of grace again, and I'm going to rest at it. And yes, cool, working as intended. Great. So now we have a way to revive monsters and characters. So before I go, this is Nephilim, and this is what I mean by adding some effects. You can see here when I toss the coin into the well, there's some smoke and the well glows and lights up. Now when I come back to the well, if it's already activated, that glow is always there. Just by adding some particles and sound effects and a nice animation, it really does make it feel very much so alive. So think of a cool theme for a checkpoint and just really lean into it. Also, if you would like to see more of Nephilim, I will leave a link in the description to my devlog so you can go check them out. The next video I post on Nephilim will be a public demo announcement, so if you want to subscribe and check that out when it launches, I will leave a link again in the description. Alright guys, thank you very much for joining me this weekend. I hope you all have a lovely weekend. A special thank you to my patrons, as always. It is because of each of you lovely individuals I get to keep doing this. So I will see you guys next week. And if you have any more ideas, because that Site of Grace idea was very, very cool, very important, and I think that was the right move doing that right now, in the comments below, just say what you'd like to see. If not, we're either going to do equipping armor or blocking. And from there, we're going to go on to leveling up.